The crop tool is one of Photoshop's most useful tools, particularly for those of you who take lots of photographs. You can use it to improve a composition and to straighten crooked photos. I've opened this photo from the practice files for this tutorial so I can show you the basics of the crop tool. I'll start by selecting the crop tool here in the Tools panel. As soon as I do, you can see this border around the whole image. That's the crop box. I'll move my cursor over any of the corners or any of the edges of the crop box and drag to reshape that box. So in this case, I might drag it way in to create a very different composition than the original photograph. As you create your crop, Photoshop shows you a preview, with the areas to be cropped away shaded in gray. That way, you can evaluate what it is you're about to eliminate before you finalize the crop. Now, before I finalize this crop, I want to go up to the Options bar to show you an important option there, and that is Delete Cropped Pixels. That option is checked by default. I usually like to uncheck that, because when Delete Cropped Pixels is checked, if you finalize the crop and save the image, you'll permanently delete the cropped away pixels. But with this option unchecked, you can bring back the cropped away pixels at any time. Let's give it a try. I'm going to finalize this crop by going over to the big check mark in the Options bar and clicking there. Now, there are other ways to finalize a crop, but I like this way because it's very simple. So now you can see the photo with the crop applied. Let's say that I'm doing something else with the image, and then I change my mind about the way I'd cropped it. At any time, I can go back and select the crop tool, and then click on the image again, and all the pixels that I'd cropped away appear back in view, and I can change my crop. This time I might include some of those cropped away pixels. By the way, you may have noticed that there's a grid of vertical and horizontal lines on top of my photo as I use the crop tool. This overlay represents a classic compositional technique known as the rule of thirds. The idea of this technique is that if you place the important content in an image at the intersection of any of these horizontal and vertical lines, you may improve the composition. Let's give it a try with this image. I'm going to place the bouquet right at this intersection by clicking on the image and dragging and placing it here. And then I might reshape the crop boundary a little more, pulling it in tighter on this bouquet. And then I'll click the check mark. Again, I'm going to click on the image with my crop tool to try to fine-tune this crop a little more. I notice that this image is a little crooked, especially down here at the table. One of the things you can do with the crop tool is straighten an image. There are a couple of ways you can do that. You either can move your cursor outside of one of the corners and manually try to drag to straighten the image, and this grid appears that helps you do that. I prefer the automatic method, so I'm going to undo. That's Command-Z on the Mac, Control-Z on the PC. So the image is crooked again, and then I'll go up to the Options bar, and I'm going to use the Automatic Straighten tool. I'll click on that tool to select it in the Options bar for the crop tool. I'll move into the image, and then I'm going to click along the edge of this table, hold my mouse down, and drag a little way further along that edge. Now, you don't have to go all the way along the edge. Sometimes just a little bit will do the trick, like this. And Photoshop uses your line as a guide to rotate the image so that the content looks straight. I'm going to fine-tune this crop a little more, maybe bringing up this edge and maybe moving the bouquet over a bit to put it right in the center. And then I'm going to go up to the Options bar and click the check mark to finalize my crop. So those are some of the basics of the crop tool. I hope you give these techniques a try to work on your own compositions in Photoshop. There may be times when you want to add to your document canvas, so there's more room to add elements like text or images to your design. You can do that by using the Canvas Size command, which we'll look at in this lesson. If you're following along, you can use this image from the practice files for this tutorial or an image of your own. To add to the canvas around this image, I'll go up to the Image menu, where there's a Canvas Size command right below the Image Size command. Now, just to keep these two straight, the Image Size command, which we looked at in another video in this tutorial, works differently than the Canvas Size command. Unlike Image Size, Canvas Size doesn't change the size of your actual photos or other artwork or images in a composition. It just lets you add space around those items. So let's select canvas size. And that opens the canvas size dialog. At the top of this dialog, you can see the width and height of this image in inches. And down here, you can add to the width of the canvas or add to the height of the canvas or both. And those fields are set to inches by default also. But when you're preparing an image for online use rather than for print, it makes more sense to change this unit of measurement to pixels, because that's the way we measure and talk about the size of images on screen, as you learned earlier in this tutorial. So I'm going to change either one of these menus from inches to pixels, and the other menu changes too. If you know the total width in pixels that you want the image to be after expanding the canvas, you could type that number here in the width field. But it's often easier to just tell Photoshop how many pixels to add to the canvas without worrying about what the total will be. To do that, come down here and click the Relative checkbox. That sets the number in the width and height fields to 0. And now I can type in the number of pixels that I want to add to the canvas. So let's say that I want to add 400 pixels to the width of the canvas. I'll type 400 here. If I wanted to add to the height of the canvas, I could do that too. I'm just going to leave that at 0 for now. And then I'll click OK to apply that. And out in the document window, you can see that Photoshop added canvas to both the left and the right sides of this photo. What it did was split the 400 pixels of extra width that I asked it for into 200 pixels on the right and 200 pixels over here on the left. Well, what if I wanted to add canvas to just one side of this image? Let's say over here to the right side. That's done slightly differently. So let's undo what we've done so far and try that instead. I'll press Command-Z on the Mac, Control-Z on a PC to undo. And I'll go back to the Image menu and choose Canvas Size again. The first thing I'm going to do here is to check that the width and height fields are still set to pixels, and they're not. They've reverted to the default inches. So again, I'll change those menus to pixels. And I'll double check that Relative is checked. As I said, I want the added canvas to appear just on the right side of this image. To do that, I'll go down to this anchor diagram, and I'm going to click on the middle box on the left side of this diagram. What that does is tell Photoshop to pin or anchor the image to the left side of the canvas and put the extra canvas to its right. So now I'm going to go up to the width field and I'm going to type in the number of pixels that I want to add to the right side of this image. Let's add 800 pixels. And click OK. And that's exactly the effect that I wanted. You probably noticed that so far my canvas extensions have all been white, but you can control the color of your canvas extension here in the Canvas Size dialog using the Canvas Extension Color menu here. By the way, if you're working on another image and you're not on a special background layer, as we are in this image, then your Canvas Extension Color menu will be unavailable, and the canvas that you add will be transparent. It will appear like a gray and white checkerboard in Photoshop. I'm just going to click Cancel, and if I want to save this image, I'll go to the File menu and I'll choose Save As so I don't save over my original. So that's how you can add space to your document canvas so you have some extra room to add more image elements. Layers are the building blocks of any image in Photoshop, so it's important to understand what layers are and why to use them, which we'll cover in this video. If you're following along, open this layered image from the downloadable practice files for this tutorial. You might think of layers like separate flat panes of glass, stacked one on top of the other. Each layer contains separate pieces of content. To get a sense of how layers are constructed, let's take a look at this Layers panel. I've closed my other panels so that we can focus on the Layers panel, but you can skip that. By the way, if your Layers panel isn't showing, go up to the Window menu and choose Layers from there. The Layers panel is where you'll go to select and work with layers. In this image, there are 4 layers, each with separate content. If you click the eye icon to the left of a layer, you can toggle the visibility of that layer off and on. So I'm going to turn off the visibility of the tailor layer and keep your eye on the image so you can see what's on that layer. I'll do the same for the cloth layer and for the pattern layer. You can see that the bottom layer, the background layer, is filled with white because this image started with a new blank image preset with a white background. Let's turn on all the other layers again by clicking in the empty box just to the left of each layer to add the eye icon back in. Now let's take a look at just one layer, the tailor layer. A quick way to turn off all the layers except the tailor layer is to hold down the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on the PC and click on the eye icon to the left of the tailor layer. In the document window, you can see that this layer contains just the one small photo surrounded by a gray and white checkerboard pattern. That pattern represents transparent pixels, which allow us to see down through the corresponding part of this layer to the content of the layers below. So let's turn that content back on by going back to the Layers panel, again holding the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on the PC, and clicking on the eye icon to the left of the tailor layer. And all the other layers and their eye icons come back into view. So again, you might think of layers like a stack of panes of glass, each with its own artwork and in some cases transparent areas that let you see down through to the layers below. The biggest benefit of having items on separate layers like this is that you'll be able to edit pieces of an image independently without affecting the rest of the image. Follow along with this example to see what I mean. Let's say that you wanted to edit or move just the small photo of the cloth being cut. To do that, you'd have to select the layer that contains that photo. Go to the Layers panel and click on the cloth layer, just to the right of the layer name. Now that the cloth layer is selected, any editing you do will affect only that layer. For example, go to the Tools panel and select the Move tool, and then click on the cloth photo and drag, and only that photo moves, because only that layer is selected. And this applies to other kinds of edits too. For example, if you painted on the image or applied a filter, as you'll do later in this tutorial series, those edits would affect only the selected cloth layer and not the rest of the image. By the way, there are some editing activities like moving layers that you can do to more than one layer at a time. And to do that, you need to select more than one layer. Over in the Layers panel, we already have the cloth layer selected. If you don't, click on that layer. To select the tailor layer too, hold down the Command key on a Mac or the Control key on a PC and click on the tailor layer. With both layers selected, you can click and drag either of those photos and they'll move together. Now here's a bonus tip. With the Move tool selected, take a look at its options bar and you'll see this option, Auto Select Layer, is checked. With that option checked, clicking anywhere in the image will automatically select the top layer at that location that contains content. For example, watch the Layers panel as I click over here on the pattern photo, and you'll see that the pattern layer was automatically selected for you in the Layers panel. Sometimes that's really useful, but sometimes it can cause you to inadvertently select a layer that you didn't mean to. To avoid that, you can uncheck Auto Select Layer in the Move tool options bar, and instead select layers manually by clicking on them in the Layers panel, as we did in this tutorial. So to recap, being able to work with selected pieces of content independently is the biggest benefit of using layers. There's lots more to learn about layers, so stay tuned for the rest of this tutorial.